Lee, it's November. We're working our way towards Thanksgiving. It's fall. And this time of year, I always think of like the first Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims and the turkey and, colonial America and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Plymouth Rock.
Yeah. But you know what that always leads me to? What? Is witchcraft.
No, Puritans. Oh,
Salem. Guys, we are going to do a special two-parter on the Salem Witchcraft Trials. Mike, roll it.
You are listening to the Beyond Terrestrial Podcast, your one-stop shop for the outstanding, the unconventional, and the downright strange. Strap in because the boys are about to take a wild ride. I'm Funk Master B, setting up that tea for the duo of tomfoolery. Your hosts, Dan and Lee.
Of course I believe in aliens. I mean, in an infinitely growing universe, why would we be the only living species? Bigfoot, Nessie, all that stuff, it's gotta be real. How are we to say that we're the only ones? It's just ignorant. I think aliens are not only from other planets, but they're time travelers.
Welcome back to the Beyond Terrestrial Podcast, your home for the strange, the macabre, the conspiratorial, and all things supernatural. I'm one half of your hosting duo.
Bye, Felicia.
Oh, that's her name, Felicia. Oh, man, B. Thanks for introducing me, because I've seen just about every other part of her today. She was literally spilling out of those fishnets, bud.
Sorry, boys. That's my girl, Felicia. She's thicker than a Snicker.
That is, B, seriously, that's a whole lot of woman. Like, that was a lot of lady.
Lay off a Funk Master. Lay off a Funk Master. He's laying down the funk. B, thank you for that excellent intro, my man. But hey, can you not have your host interrupt the show anymore? Thanks, dude.
Can you just not have him over anymore? That'd be great.
You know what? Just have him kick him out before we start. It's okay. It's all right. You're cool, B.
Dude, it smells like sex and semen in here, which is ironically what sex smells like.
Wow. Anyways, guys, like I was saying, this is the Beyond Terrestrial Podcast. The Haunted Barn Studios have been taken over by Funk Master B. But he's a cool dude. Guys, I don't know where I'm going
my
with
wine.
this. Oh.
Good on you. Thanks, bud.
See,
I'm a classy lady today. I'm drinking wine.
Ooh, look at you, so fancy.
Yeah.
Wow. This show is off to a rocky start, Lee.
Well,
rocky.
It's a rocky subject. It's got some twists and turns.
It does. There's a lot to this one.
Somebody
and
is
I
even
think it's
killed
going to be a
by
two-parter.
rocks.
Oh, yeah, true. Facts. Ooh. I like how you segued that in there. That's good.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You
better hurry. I'm like halfway through this bottle. It's going to get awkward.
If you don't know, I'm Dan. That's Lee. I'm recording just down from where Robert Johnson made his infamous deal with the devil. Lee, where you at and how's it going?
Well, as always, I'm inside the Haunted Barn Studios, and I am coming to you from the Bell Witch's backyard, that is Clarksville, Tennessee. And I'm excited because this episode, man, I did some research this episode.
Yes, we've been talking a lot in the last few episodes. We did quite a bit for the president's one. We did some research for that one. But then we kind of went on a lull, and now we're deep into this. We got deep in this subject, and it's going to be a two-parter. So I think, though, before we get to the cold, rocky shores of New England, we have to mention the hot, sandy deserts of sunny Las Vegas, Nevada, Lee.
Oh, yeah. That's where our friends over at Simple Equations Media run their business out of. Simple Equations is an all-inclusive video and audio editing company. Dan knows a little bit more about him. He's going to continue this statement because I have officially gotten lost.
Yes, I believe the words you're looking for, Lee, are full-service audio-video production company.
Isn't that what I just said?
You said all-inclusive, like you get free drinks when you go there.
Ooh. Do you? Mike, clear that up for us.
Did you say something about free beer?
I don't think so. But anyways, guys, they can take your ideas from pre-production through post-production. If you have a music video you want to shoot for your garage band, if you have a big project, a training video to do at your job, if you're trying to break into TV or film, guys, Simple Equations Media has got your back. You can find them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Simple Equation _ and they're great guys to work with. Give them a call. They make us sound good. We are stumbling through this one today, but props to them. So anyways, Lee, back to New England.
Back to New England. That was ironically a sequel to it was a prequel to Back to the Future, but it didn't go over too well.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, New England, really the sequel to England.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And early on, kind of a weird sequel. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a weird turn. New England,
yeah.
The prevailing religion was Puritanism, and that religion was a group of people that felt persecuted back in England, and they moved over here to the U.S. They were what we call the Pilgrims, and they established a community in New England.
Right, exactly. So everyone knows, the first Thanksgiving, Plymouth Rock, Mayflower Compact, 1620, blah, 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 blah. What a lot of people don't know about Puritans is that it's actually kind of a form of Anglicanism, right? So we all know that the English Church, the Church of England, split off from the Roman Catholic Church because Henry VIII wanted a divorce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Classic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, they didn't like how close the Church of England still was to, like, Catholic traditions.
Okay.
And they were very fervent in their beliefs about public confession and reading the Bible for yourself. So they were shunned in England. People were like, those guys are crazy. So they came here to America and started what would become the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Yeah, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Yeah, that's what I got, Dan. I'm trying to jump in with, like, prevalent facts, but I've got nothing for this one at this point.
Oh, okay. We're talking about settlement of early New England. So, okay. We all know the first Thanksgiving. We've gotten past that. Mm-hmm. Plymouth was eventually absorbed into the Massachusetts Bay Colony, right?
Yes.
And so was Salem. Actually, Salem was founded before Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was originally called, Naumkeag.
Of course.
That was the Indian name for it.
It's actually the oldest, town that still exists in the U.S.
Oh, yeah. It
predates Boston. It predates them all, I believe.
Yes, it does predate Boston. So that is definitely true. So what's cool about Salem is its story parallels Plymouth a lot. So, the Puritans arrived at Plymouth. There weren't any Indians around because they had all died off in a plague a few years earlier, around 1616.
Okay.
So when the Puritans show up in Salem, which they had actually moved south from an abandoned colony, and they moved down to Salem. So when they moved to Salem, there's nobody there. You know, couple empty wigwams, a nice harbor for fishing. Like, it's actually a pretty good spot. So they set up shop.
Perfect. That's what we do.
Yes.
We move into abandoned places, take it over. I mean, that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm in the haunted barn.
Right. Well, you better watch out, man. Bees cutting in on your turf in there.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm drinking the wine.
But that's neither here nor there. So anyways, speaking of cutting in on turf, the original settlers of Namkeg, what would become Salem, were mostly, I believe, from the Westerlands of England. And then they had some of these East Anglians, these more Puritans, move in when there were waves of Puritan immigration to Massachusetts. And so they show up and they're like, okay, there was some strife a little bit, but they decide to essentially share all the colony. Mm-hmm. They worked it out amongst themselves. One of the big guys in this, his name was Endicott. He got a huge grant of land out in the western part of Salem, and these Endicott farms were very near what would become Salem Village and the hotbed of these witchcraft trials.
Yes, Salem Village was an amazing place, filled with many people that kind of hated each other, but kept it secret under the guise of religion.
Yeah, so this was very interesting. In the research I did, it was from a book called, oh my gosh, I should have written that down. A Storm of Witchcraft. In the book, they explain why there were like all these court cases among the early settlers. Mm-hmm. Because you see like these people going to court over and over and over again for like dumb stuff, like his cow came onto my land, right? Or that guy's horse kicked over my fence, that sort of stuff.
That sounds like a typical American way of doing things, like just sue them. Isn't that what we do?
We would expect that now, yeah.
Like you walk into like a grocery store in flip-flops on a rainy day, you slip and fall, but it's the grocery store's fault, right?
Right. Well, the thing is, this was just the way to settle these debates back then. Like, whose land was whose was very up for interpretation back then, because some of these land grants were just made like, oh, I'm going to grant you some land, and I'm going to grant you some land, and I'm going to grant you some land. And it kind of took the courts to determine who actually got what. Sometimes these land grants overlapped. Okay.
So it was very much like Oprah was giving out land. You get some land.
Right,
you
except
get some land.
in this case, Oprah was like the king of England.
Kind of is.
And the governor of the colony.
Kind of is.
Which Massachusetts, very unique early on, the governors were elected by the freemen, by the voters of Massachusetts. So a democratic tradition very early on, and that kind of rubbed the English the wrong way. They didn't like that.
Well, I mean, they want to keep their monarchy intact.
Right. And they wanted their guy in charge. So there was a lot of civil strife in England around this time. In fact, the English Civil War happened in between the founding of Salem and the Salem Witch Trials. Mm-hmm. And then the monarchy was restored. And so when the monarchy was restored, the king decided that he was going to have a little bit tighter control of his colonies.
So ultimately, when the monarchy...
That was like Charles II, I think. I don't know. But anyway, continue.
ultimately, when the monarchy originally fell, the charter for the Massachusetts Bay Colony essentially lapsed at that point, or was null and void now. And that opened up the door for the Puritans, as well as the leadership of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, to essentially create their own laws. They were fairly well self-governed before, but now they have like almost free reign. And it kind of created a bit of a perfect storm, as it were, to allow these witch trials to occur. There was no clear and defined law that they could follow to a certain extent. They were roughly following what would be referred to as British common law, but that's not a set of like written down rules.
Right. So Lee's totally right. The charter had been had lapsed, had been thrown out by the English. And so, you know, I should note, like, I say English, pretty much all these people considered them English. So when I say English, I mean Englishmen in England, like the Crown.
Yeah. So henceforth, will refer to the Crown or people in England as English, and the colonies as colonists.
Colonists, yeah. But
I'm helping.
The Crown appointed a new governor, a guy named William Phipps, and in 1691, him and the very famous Reverend Increase Mather helped create a new charter in England, and they brought it back. And, you know, 1691, these trials all happened in like 1692. The 1691 charter said the colony's laws needed to be in line with English law. And so everything that the colonists had passed up till then got thrown out, all their court system, everything. So these trials kind of happen in a time, like Lee was saying, where there is no defined law. The legislature hasn't met to redefine how the judicial system is going to work.
Yeah.
So eventually what happens, we'll get into it, but the Salem Witch Trials happened essentially in an illegal court.
Yes. So to kind of give an example, during the time of the Salem Witch Trials, that charter was still being written and finalized, and then it still had to cross the Atlantic with Phipps and Increase Mather. So during the initial start of this situation, there is no governing body. There is no actual charter, and everybody is in kind of limbo with it.
Yeah, and I think I know Phipps and them got back to the colonies. This is another important thing to note, is there was war happening during this time with the natives.
Mm-hmm.
There had been King Philip's War and then King William's War. A lot of the area that is now Maine was ravaged by these wars. Maine was part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, where the town where it was under the jurisdiction of the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Yes, and to clarify my statement on that, in my research, it showed that Maine was its own separate colony. However, it was, when the crown fell, Massachusetts was like, oh no, we're in control now.
Yeah, it kind of became this dominion of New England. Like Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, a bunch of spots were all kind of absorbed into the control of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Yet again, another reason why the crown had to assert its control over the colony with a new charter.
Yes.
So, this is like super political background. This is like the prequel series of Star Wars where we're all into the politics of it.
I just want to interject with one joke. I need to say this joke.
Okay, do
The
it.
crown falls, the charter goes away, Massachusetts looks at the other New England, per se, colonies and says, look at me. Look at me. I'm the king now. You're welcome.
I mean, yeah, essentially. So let's get to the war, because that's the part that people like.
Yes.
Where the city of Portland, Maine now, that was very poor speech. Where the city of Portland, Maine is now was the colonial town of Falmouth.
Okay.
And it was wiped out by the Wabanaki tribe and their French allies. So the Puritans, they did not like the natives. They were considered savages and in league with the devil. And they did not like the French because they were Catholics, and of course the Pope is also in league with the devil.
Well, yeah. To Puritans,
these
anything outside their religion was devil.
Oh, yeah. Quakers, some of the nicest people who have the reputation for being the nicest people, were considered in these colonial times by Puritans to be, devilish. They thought the quaking was like a demonic possession or something. And then, get this, Lee, the Quakers let women talk at their meetings.
Yeah, that was
Ooh.
yeah, that was pretty out there. The amazing thing though is these witch trials completely throw that whole patriarchy on its head for like a month, like several months, right? Like
Yes.
typically
Yes.
women aren't listened to, young women especially, they're just blown off, right? And now they're the ones controlling this. Like they are,
Right.
yeah.
So yeah, patriarchy was big. There was a fear of war. In fact, Salem was not that far away from a lot of the fighting, and there were people in the county and the surrounding areas who said they saw Indians lurking here and Frenchmen coming down from this place. So there was a lot of suspicion, a lot of paranoia around this conflict that was happening. King William's War. It's funny, one thing to point out, the Puritans couldn't pronounce a lot of the native names, so they would give them English names. So King Philip's War is actually just their name for the native chief. I know. How anglicized is that? And history remembers it as King Philip's War.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So there you go. But yeah, these wars were devastating to the Puritans, and their military actions against the French and the Indians were not very good. Their counterattacks were repulsed all the time, usually with heavy losses. So their military endeavors, bad. This happened during the Salem Witch Trials happened during a time called the Maunder Minimum of the Little Ice Age. So the winters were bad. Mm-hmm. That means crops failed. That means the economy was poor. So you have patriarchy, you have war, you have bad economies, cold winters, and a drive for moral reform. Lee, in any of your research, did you see any of this moral reformation that the Puritans were striving for at this time?
Yeah, a big part of what they wanted to be, especially in Salem Village specifically, there had been a modification to the church where they opened up these covenants to allow more people to become full members of the church, and they called this the halfway covenants. And essentially, as opposed to how other people were able to or had to enter the church, which was they had to fully confess in front of the entire congregation all of their sins, and they had to essentially humiliate themselves in front of the entire town to become a part of the church. Well, these halfway covenants allowed the person to go meet with the priest alone, confess their sins to the priest. If the priest was like, yeah, that's good enough, they could become a part of the church. And it was allowing more people to enter the church, but according to the more devout Puritans, it was allowing more people that were not as spiritually pure as others.
Right.
That created some strife between Salem Town and Salem Village. Salem Town had the halfway covenant. Salem Village was fighting to not have that halfway covenant.
Yes, so this is the religious schism that existed between Salem Village and Salem Town. Salem was a really big area originally that encompassed like something like 4 or 5 towns now.
Yeah.
And eventually those areas that were further away from the meeting house would split off. They'd create their own churches. And Salem Village was something like 7 miles away from Salem Town. They wanted to have their own church, but there was strife between the villagers and the townspeople, and there were factions that some of them wanted the halfway covenant, some of them didn't, some of them supported this minister, some of them didn't, and it created a ton of problems. In fact, so the Salem Village parish was not a full church for some time until what's-his-face Paris shows up. In the time before Reverend Paris showed up, they had like 3 other ministers over a course of like 16 years, something like that. And this is a time when a minister would normally serve like 20 years in one church. So this was very uncommon for the era.
Well, and the other thing with that is just looking at the way it worked. From my research, essentially the town had to accept the minister, and they referred to that as being ordained, which is a little different than the way that we ordain ministers today.
What, on the internet?
Well, yeah, I mean, Dan can marry me, so yeah. Not him
I
marry
cannot
me. Well,
actually
he can,
marry you.
but
I'm already married.
yeah, you're gonna have to get a divorce first, buddy.
I can perform weddings. Yes, that is true.
But essentially, these other 3 ministers just didn't make the cut. Were too out there, too accepting of different protocols, and they were not ordained by the and not accepted by the parish, and eventually got washed out by all of them.
Right. Yes. And one of them, George Burroughs, becomes a very big figure later on in these trials.
Yes.
But eventually, a dude named Samuel Paris shows up, Reverend Samuel Paris, and he gets the job as the minister of the Salem Village Church, which does eventually become its own incorporated church. With covenants and everything. So you had to have a certain number of church members sign a covenant for a new church. Mm-hmm. So they had a bunch of people sign this covenant. And, not surprisingly, Lee, most of the covenant signers were supporters of Paris.
Yes.
So we had seen factions form behind ministers early on in Salem. The same thing happened pretty much as soon as Paris showed up, especially because this dude drove a hard bargain. Like, he decided he was going to get paid to do this job.
Oh, yeah. And he was definitely... He had it in his contract. He wanted firewood, and and he ended up with land, which was unheard of.
Right. They deeded the parsonage to him, which was a very strange move.
Yes.
And this was probably supported by like the Putnam family. They were big supporters of Paris. So other members of the community are like, whoa. They're giving this guy way too much. He's too strict. We don't really like him. So what they did, Lee, is they just didn't pay their ministerial taxes. Like, the whole town was supposed to pay the minister. Mm-hmm. A bunch of people just held out. They were just like, no, we don't like him, so we're not going to pay.
Yeah. And I think that to a certain extent that added to the pressure and the stress that Samuel Parris was under. Not only was he fighting an uphill battle from the beginning, he did have some very strong supporters. The Putnam family, they were very prominent members of the community. They were essentially, as far as in Salem Village, they were the basically the richest family. There was another family in Salem Town the Putnams didn't get along with, and I'm sorry, Dan, I can't remember the name of that family.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, so yes, there was another family, and in fact, it was part of the forming of Salem Village was so the Putnam family could have more control because the other family from Salem Town had more control than the Putnams did. So not going back to that, but the Putnams were very in power, and they allowed Parris to really gain his foothold. Problem is, the rest of the town didn't necessarily feel the same.
Well, and there's clearly a division here between the town, Salem Town, and Salem Village. Salem Village is now actually the town of Danvers, Massachusetts. So totally different spot now. The town is down by the harbor. There's warehouses. There's merchant activity. There's shipping. The villages is further west, and there's a lot of farmland out there. Now, back in the day, land meant money.
Yes.
People were granted lots of land to help support them, especially people who were public servants. And the Putnams had a lot of ground that they worked with. And their support of Parris maybe made him more confrontational with the people who didn't like him. So that was kind of exacerbated. But the people who didn't like him eventually kind of coalesced, and they decided that not only were they going to not pay for his salary, they were going to cut off his firewood too.
This is the big thing in New England. It's a big thing in New England now, like just staying warm.
Yeah, for sure, dude.
But
so
back then, as Dan said earlier, it was, at the end of the mini ice age, it was cold. These winters were rough. Parris was mad.
So, guys, we have been getting deep, and it's getting cold, and I think it's time we should take a quick break.
Yeah, let's head to break.
Are you a fan of movies?
Or comics?
Or video games?
Or just anything else nerdy?
Well, you should check out the Zing This Podcast. And that's spelled
Zeng.
This. And we have nerdy topics from comic book reviews to in-depth analysis of iconic nerdy movies, as well as video game discussions. Mm-hmm. Where's some of the best places to find us, Allie?
Well, Podbean, of course.
You can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play.
Anywhere else you listen to your podcast. Yeah.
So check us out. Once again, that is
Zing This.
And we're back. So we were just talking about how the atmosphere that Samuel Parris was under. Samuel Parris was the priest of Salem Village. And he is under immense pressure right now. It is getting cold. It is, getting a little desolate. And most of the town members aren't giving him his firewood that it was inside his contract, was written into his contract.
Yeah. So yeah, essentially people don't like the minister. They've decided to freeze him out, and they want him out of the parsonage, which has been deeded to him. They just don't like this guy. And he was very fire and brimstone leading up to the events of January 1692 that really kick all of this off. If you look back, some of his sermons are written down in the town book, and he's very agitated, and he's very aggressive, and uses a lot of warlike rhetoric.
Yes.
About battling the devil. And I think he's trying to act tough to his opponents, but you gotta think his kid is like 9, sitting in the audience listening to these stories about battling the devil, and goes home to a father who is angry, who is, I mean, let's be honest, a failure in most of his dealings. We haven't gone into his personal life, but he came up to Massachusetts from Barbados. He had inherited a plantation down there, a sugar plantation,
and ran it into the ground.
Yeah, this dude should have made money. Like back in the day, sugar planters made bank, right?
Yeah. So this is the equivalent of inheriting a company and just going bankrupt.
Dude, the guy went to Harvard, right?
Dropped out.
Yeah, like he has failed over and over and over again, and now here he is in a backwater church, right? That he thought he had driven a hard bargain for to secure himself, and now he is not secure.
Yeah.
And now maybe his house is freezing.
Yes. Now, one last fact about his history prior to coming here. After he left the plantation, he sold everything, got out of there by the skin of his teeth, came to Boston. Boston, he opens a merchant company and isn't able to keep up with the rest of the merchants around him and fails at that too.
Yes, yeah, he was not good at a lot of the stuff he did, and maybe he wasn't that likable. I don't know. Clearly, there were factions formed against him. He was very strict, and he was a moral reformer, and there were some people who gravitated towards that, but clearly it wasn't enough to keep him warm. So,
yeah,
in January 1692, the bewitching begins.
Yes.
So we've got a lot of background. We've got war, we've got economics, we've got climate, we've got everything. What the hell kind of bewitching happens in the Salem Village parsonage, Lee? Like, what does all of this precipitate?
So it ultimately starts with Samuel Parris's daughter, right? So his daughter ends up going into fits, convulsions, if you will. And Mr. Parris, to his fairness, does not immediately jump to it being witches. The first thing he does is he consults the town doctor. Now, to be fair to this doctor, he was just a guy in kind of an unfortunate situation. This wasn't a true medically trained doctor, and granted, medically trained doctors of the time weren't necessarily the most knowledgeable people. However,
right.
He was more along the lines of just a guy that kind of knew about medicine. He was like a nurse, maybe not even a nurse.
Yes, the doctor assumed by history to be a man named Griggs, like William Griggs, I believe.
Yeah.
So yeah, he comes out. He checks out little Betty Parris. She's 9 years old. Her limbs are contorting. She's like choking at times. Can't speak. She says she's being poked by invisible pins. And this affliction also spreads to her cousin, who is living at the Paris household, 11-year-old Abigail Williams.
Yes. Now, an interesting note about Abigail Williams is Abigail Williams is actually I guess the best way to put it is a refugee from Maine. And I don't want to bring too much into that at the moment, but she is a refugee from the wars that are going on. And this spreads. And ultimately, the doctor decides that, well, it must be witchcraft. These two young ladies have been bewitched.
Right. And so these investigations get pretty crazy. It starts out medical, right? As medical as you can be in 1692. It's not like they could give the girls a CAT scan. But even in this day and age,
can you imagine a CAT scan in 1692? By the way, just be like setting a cat on their chest and seeing what the cat does.
I guess you could put a magnet next to their brain and then guess. That's the closest you could get to a CAT scan.
Sorry.
But yeah, so the doctor, of course, he can't find anything. And you know what? In cases of, if you assume the Salem Witch Trials are mass hysteria, even modern science cannot really describe that very well. So the doctor really had an uphill road in 1692.
Yeah.
That's a tough row to hoe.
Oh yeah.
As they say.
I absolutely don't blame the doctor for this. I can see myself in that position, right? You basically know basic first aid, and you're asked to diagnose this person that's having a seizure, essentially.
Right, you're like, you know what? I think she has bad blood. Let's suck it all out.
Yeah, it must be ghosts in the blood. You should do cocaine about it.
I prescribe leeches. So yeah, things start getting crazy. They bring in some ministers, and people check it out, and they're like, "Yeah, you know what? Those girls, they're bewitched."
So it's interesting, though. At this point, Mr. Paris, Reverend Paris, leaves, and I believe he goes down to Boston to try to get more help.
Yes,
and when he leaves, a really unfortunate event occurs.
Are you talking about the witch cake?
I am talking about the witch cake. Now, I can't remember the neighbor, but there is a neighbor.
Her name was Mary Sibley. Mary Sibley.
There is a neighbor, Mary Sibley, who is essentially put in charge of the household at that time. And she is basically asked to look over the kids. Well, Mary Sibley decides and kind of takes it upon herself to, I guess, use an old remedy from back in her day, I guess, which consists of some interesting ingredients.
Lee, let's not beat around the bush, okay? It's a piss cake.
Okay, all right. So
let's not beat
she
around the bush.
suggests to the Paris' servant girl, one only referred to as Tituba. She's
got
slave.
one name. She's like Cher. She's like the Cher of this story.
Yes. Now Tituba,
or Rihanna.
Yes.
Yeah, she's more like the Rihanna.
Only referred to as Tituba Indian. And some of the more contemporary views view her as a black slave, because that's what we are used to. However, she is more likely of Native American descent. In fact, most likely from Barbados. I don't know what they would be. Barbados.
Right. Yes. There is a record of her sale to the Parises in Barbados. So, or they the name's slightly different. It's written down as Tatuba, but it's assumed that that's where she was acquired.
Okay. Yeah. So Tituba bakes this piss cake because, well, she's trying to help her master. She's trying to be useful in this situation. She's trying to help solve the problem. And you also have to take into account that she is from a culture, and until she was, ultimately sold, she's from a culture that believes in this kind of stuff as well. Magic was huge in everywhere at this time.
Yes. And that's something that is in a lot of my research that I saw. White magic was very common, even amongst the Puritans. Now, magic, any form of magic, is seen as a gateway for the devil. That's why some religious people are still very opposed to Harry Potter, right? Because any magic is bad. If it doesn't come from God, if it's not a miracle, then it's bad. White magic could be something as simple as a horseshoe turned right side up to, catch evil spirits. Mm-hmm. They would put these eel forks in their house. They looked kind of like the devil's trident. They were a little 3-forked deal you used to spear a fish or something like that. They would hide them in the roof beams of their house, in the main beams of the roof. And that was supposed to ward off the devil. There was all kinds of little things like this that people just did back in the day, even though it was, it was taboo amongst the Puritan culture. But people still did them because they believed in magic. They thought all this invisible world of spirits and demons and devils was real, and they had to ward it off some way.
Exactly. So Tituba bakes this piss cake, and they feed it to the family dog.
Exactly. Because the dog, once he eats this bread, and it was rye bread, it wasn't really a cake, it's like a rye bread that has some piss mixed in.
Okay, to clarify, this is piss of the afflicted girls.
Yes. It's got to be from the afflicted girls, Lee.
That's the important part.
That's the science of it, because it's weird how the science of this works, right, in people's brains back then. Because, the witchcraft is some kind of, it's not entirely supernatural. It could be some kind of particle. It could be some kind of voodoo. It could be some kind of ether. It's something that's in you now. And that you can pass into your water. And then if you bake it into a cake and feed it to a dog, now the dog can sense where that affliction came from, and it's going to go find the witch.
Sorry. I couldn't
say, sick 'em boy, find the witch. Where is she? Get 'em, boy.
Is the witch in the well, lassie? Is the witch in the well?
Do you need more pea bread, boy? Eat some more bread, boy. You'll find that witch.
Okay, so back to the seriousness of this. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work.
What?
Yeah. Paris comes back. The girls are still afflicted. In fact, they may be acting worse than they were prior to him leaving.
Right, because now witchcraft and magic have entered the fray, and Paris is pissed. He's like, any magic done in his house is bad, as a bad reflection on him. He's a minister. So he's like, this has opened the door to the devil, and now the girls are going nuts.
Yes. So Paris gets upset. Paris starts making some accusations. The girls start making some accusations. He starts asking questions. Who has been afflicting you? And unfortunately, the girls start naming names.
And, I think this whole witch cake incident really colored Paris's accusations, probably, and the girls too, because who do they name? Not their nice old neighbor lady, Mary Sibley, but the servant who baked the cake.
Yeah. So she's now the one being accused of witchcraft.
Old Tituba. Now, side note, Lee, really quick, in popular culture, a lot of people know about the Salem Witch Trials from the film or the play, The Crucible. Have you ever seen it?
I have actually not, but I heard a lot about it in my research.
Yeah, so we did like The Crucible in high school, like my junior year or something like that. So that was a long time ago, but we did watch the movie. It's got Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, come on, you can't beat that. But the script of the play takes, even though it says it's historically accurate, it is not historically accurate. They change Abigail Williams' age to 17 so that she can have an affair with a grown man who's John Proctor, portrayed by Daniel Day-Lewis. So, like, that part wasn't true. Her and Betty are, like, fortune-telling with Tituba, and, like, that's how all these accusations get passed down in the play. But there's actually no evidence of this fortune-telling or the affair. I mean, the girl was 11. Like, she wasn't having any affairs.
Yeah. So Tituba is being questioned. And initially, she denies it.
Right. They brought up some heavies. So this period of investigation isn't actually a trial.
No.
Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. And they bring up some heavies. I believe like the deputy governor, Danforth, gets brought up for this thing. So there are a lot of big time male officials in this meeting questioning a slave girl. Right. In a system that is extremely patriarchal. Do any of these people give two shits about Tituba? No.
No. So Tituba initially denies it. And then that particular inquest, that day of inquest ends. And at least according to my research, the Parises go home. The next day, however, Tituba is significantly more willing to discuss the situation. Am I wrong, Dan?
Well, so I didn't get that deep in the research, Lee, but it is, the thing is, all of these girls live in a house with a minister. And these witchcraft stories that circulated around New England and cases of witchcraft even from England would not be unknown to them. The biggest witch hunts in England happened in the East Anglia region that was dominated by Puritans. So Puritan writings from England would be in the Paris household. He would know about witchcraft. He's a minister. The girls would know about witchcraft. So Tituba would know. There was a very strong emphasis in New England on reading. In fact, some of the literacy rates that the Puritans had are shockingly good, like better than countries nowadays.
Yeah. Now, they couldn't necessarily write, but they could read great.
Right, and this emphasis was from reading the Bible for yourself. So everyone was taught to read. And so not only could they hear these stories from their minister father, who was very fire and brimstone, very war against the devil, right? It's strange. It's weirdly how a guy who's talking about war with Satan suddenly has witchcraft in his home and can crusade against Satan.
Wait. You're telling me it may have been like some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy?
You know, it's weird, right? It's weird. And I'm not saying he coaxed these girls into faking it. Because he probably didn't. There's a chance he did.
Mm-hmm.
There's a chance he did. But this is, Abigail Williams had come from Maine. She had seen war. She's living in a home where they might be cold. Like she could have died in one of these attacks, frozen to death, starved, been murdered by Indians, right? And now she might freeze in this house. Like, it's not weird if this kid had PTSD.
Yeah.
Right?
And then you've got another 9-year-old girl right next to her that's hearing her go through this pain and torture, right?
Right. And hearing her father, who is going through all kinds of issues too.
Yes.
So she's getting it from all around in the house. It's not surprising that she would also act up.
Yes. Now, here is one thing that I am willing to say. I am willing to say that in my belief, they went back to the Paris household and Paris beat a confession out of Tituba and basically got Tituba to a point where she was just ready to say whatever was going to stop the pain and keep herself from being hung, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where things start to go off the rails.
Yeah, she comes in and she spills the beans, and she gives the judges, the investigators, these are really investigators at this time, a textbook description of how witchcraft works in according to
Puritan
the ideas
beliefs
of New Englanders. Yeah. She says that she was approached by the devil and that she signed his book and that she sent her specter to torment these two little girls. See, Lee, back in the day, if you didn't want to go like torture somebody and you were a witch in league with the devil, you could just send your spirit out to go do your dirty work.
It's much like remote viewing, only with some physical abilities involved.
Yes, real physical interaction. She had familiars, like animals had come and spoken to her on behalf of the devil to convince her to sign the devil's book. And it's crazy how signing the devil's book is such a big deal in these trials that follow.
Yes. Now, here's the thing. Tituba not only confesses to her signing the devil's book, she, through further investigation, and I say that with hopefully implied air quotes, starts to name some names. And it starts with two other women. Dan, do you remember the names?
Lee, I do remember Lee, but we are pushing an hour on this show. I think what we need to do is take a quick break, recap, and then split it in two.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages from our friends at Fourth Hand.
Welcome to the trailer for What the Suck podcast. Do you like movies?
Do you like horror movies?
You know, movies like Exorcist 2 and The Bye-Bye Man.
Well, those of you still with us are just the weirdos we want.
We watch all the terrible, no good, so bad they are bad movies you never knew existed.
Have you seen Wish Upon, I Am Zozo, Creepshow 3 perhaps? You haven't? Well, lucky for you, we have, and we are here to tell you all about them because we believe that no matter how bad a movie is, it should be watched. Someone put at least some effort into these, and bad movies deserve love too.
And boy, do we love watching them. So, please join us, your hosts Chris and James, on What the Suck Podcast for a weekly discussion of all things bad, good, good, bad, 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 so bad they are good, so good they are bad, so bad they are bad, and Gary Busey.
That's my best Busey. I don't know if that works, but
it works for me. Found everywhere podcasts can be listened to.
And we're back. We are almost done with our first part of the Salem Witch Trials. Before we go, Lee, tell us a little bit about what we've learned about Salem.
All right. We have learned that Salem is a town split by two families that just completely disagree in essentially just about everything. But not only that, we are now in a town called Salem Village that has been split off from Salem Town, and we are in a place of extreme fear, extreme fanaticism, extreme cold and pressure on essentially the main driving leadership in the town, in the priest of Samuel Parris, because that's how these towns were made up. Like, Samuel Parris was essentially the mayor, and we are in war with Native Americans and the French, and we have devils all around us.
Yes,
we have identified one of them.
That is a great way to put it, Lee. Devils all around. And in fact, the writers of the time saw it as a storm brewing from an invisible world. It just turned out that the invisible world wasn't like this spiritual realm. It was all in their heads.
Oh, yeah.
The paranoia, the fear, it was all from economic factors, from legal factors, from climate, and yeah, I mean, fear of actual war and death and Indian attack, and this drive for moral reform that all blend together to create really a powder keg in Salem Village.
Yes. And that's essentially where we're going to leave off today.
Yes, we have primed this thing, and next week, Lee, it is going to explode.
Oh, yeah. It goes crazy next week. Guys, we need you to come back.
And keep tuning in for more tales from out there beyond terrestrial.
Thank you for listening to Beyond Terrestrial, all three of y'all. If you're still a fan of this show, follow Beyond Terrestrial on social media and join the Beyonders Facebook group for even more strangeness. Links to everything, including previous episodes, are available at beyondterrestrial.com. That's the place to go for stickers, merch, show swag, and our Patreon. Patrons get exclusive access to ad-free shows, giveaways, and the unedited after-show show. Anything you give to the show goes straight to Funk Master B's bachelor pad, which for now is also where these jive turkeys record this show. This show was edited by Simple Equations Media with music by Mike Root. Dan and Lee will be back next Tuesday with more from Beyond Terrestrial.